Let's get ready to mortgage. He is the prince of programs, guru of guidelines, master of matrices. He puts the fun in funding. Please welcome Mark, Mr. Mortgage Eitel.
All right. Good Saturday morning to you. That's right. I am Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show, and I do put the fun in funding. I love that intro. But yes, Mark Eitel here. This is the Mr. Mortgage Show. We do this every Saturday, same time, same channel, and then 24/7 on the podcast network. So we are getting more and more podcast listeners, which is super cool. So anywhere you listen to podcasts, you can now find the Mr. Mortgage Show, obviously on the iHeart app. But if you use a different platform, we're there too. So anytime you want to hear replays of the show, just Google the Mr. Mortgage Show or visit themrmortgageshow.com, and we are there. So super excited about that. But yeah, we are happy to be here. It's a gorgeous day, gorgeous Saturday. I hope everybody's got some big plans after the show. Hang in there with us for a little while. We're going to have some fun this week. But again, Mark Eitel here, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. And always we tend to start the show with kind of the mortgage and real estate news of the week. But before we do that, I want to share a story that just happened to me this morning. It was kind of funny. My ego got the better of me. So on my way into the studio where Dom, my producer, and I do this little mortgage mashup each Saturday, I typically stop for a cup of coffee or occasionally a Monster if I had a long night. I need some caffeine to get rolling. And this morning was no exception. And the cashier at the convenience store has gotten to know me over the last several weeks and calls me Mr. Mortgage, which is awesome for the ego. But there was a woman, and I'm assuming her daughter, young girl in front of her in line, in front of me rather, in line at the convenience store. And I was buying a Monster because it was a long night last night. And we were all talking, the cashier, me, and the woman, and the daughter. And he got it, hey, Mr. Mortgage, have a great show. And she said, show, the mother. And I said, yeah, I'm on my way to the studio. We do a radio show. And she said, oh, that's kind of cool. And the conversation continued. And she got her cell phone out and she said, do you mind? And I thought she wanted a photograph with Mr. Mortgage. I thought it was selfie time. So, I'm fixing my hair and kind of leaning in. And she says, no, I don't want a picture of you. Will you take a picture of me and my daughter? So anyway, my ego got the better of me. I thought I was recognized for a moment for the show. So I thought I'd share that. Sometimes that funny stuff is a good way to get the day started. But yeah, she didn't want a photograph of me. She wanted me to take a picture of she and her daughter. So anyway, Mr. Mortgage is not as famous as I thought. Well, at least not outside of that convenience store. So anyway, I hope everybody had a great week. I know it was a challenging week in the news for real estate and mortgage related topics. We are in an interest rate environment that continues to experience upward pressure. If you've been following any of the news articles that we produce over the last year or so, or listener to this show, it's no surprise to you. We've been talking about this for a long time, and honestly, it's long overdue. It's just, I don't think anybody's concerned about where we are. It's how fast we got here, I think, is what has everybody just kind of reeling, if you will. So I just wanted to get that out of the way. Interest rates are, as we've talked about for a long time, they're in this range and they're going to stay here for a while. And, they'll move in quarter point increments, maybe up and down throughout the cycle. Federal Reserve is intent on raising the overnight rate. By the balance sheet reduction, we're experiencing some mortgage interest rate pressures there, more so than the actual overnight rate being raised. So anyway, it's not bad news. It's just the news. So 30-year mortgage rates, I would expect to remain in this 4.5% to 5.5% interest rate range wherever you land based on your program. You're going to probably be somewhere in there. And it's still a great time to buy real estate. We talked a little bit about it last week, and I had some interesting conversations after the show because I don't you may remember we talked about bamboo toilet paper, the pandemic, and supply and demand. And I kind of weaved a story about all of those as an example of what is actually controlling the home valuations that we're seeing. It's supply and demand more so than the cost of money. Now, if money continues to become more expensive, there's going to be less buy-side demand, and and May is the operative word here, put a little bit of pressure on the market, but there still is far more demand to buy than sell. So that's what most economists are hanging their hat on, signaling that the home values are most likely going to stay in place and continue to appreciate, albeit at a slower pace. I've been calling for a 6 to 9% appreciation rate for months now. So eventually we'll get there and I'll be right. And I'll be able to say, I told you so 6 months ago, but it's going to take some time. We're already starting to see it slow a bit. But by no means do I think we're headed for the quote unquote crash. And we can talk about that. If you have questions about that, shoot them in. I don't know if that's a topic of conversation that people want to cover. I'm happy to dive in. I got into the mortgage business originally in 1999. So I've seen a lot. I've been through some cycles. I think I've got some valuable insight on, where we are and what's similar about this market and what's different. And maybe in all that, there's some answers to some questions that may help you. But happy to dive into that. Just shoot us a question if you have one regarding that topic. Otherwise, I'm not going to bore you with it. I would focus on supply and demand and not the actual cost of money when trying to predict a downturn. And nobody's been right in predicting downturns or slowing housing markets anytime in the near past. So I think, we just have to see where we go from here. It's still a wonderful opportunity to buy when you look at the cost of buying versus renting. Actually, you know what? I have started to produce a piece, and it's going out on the Facebook page and on the Mr. Mortgage Show YouTube channel. And we're going to start doing it daily. And we did one on Thursday, which was focused on looking at your budget instead of your interest rate. And we used an example, and I'll give you a very brief summary here. If it's at all of interest to you, check it out on the Facebook page or on the YouTube channel. But I used a very recent real world example of a client who called me during the week this week and said, hey, I'm just going to sit this out. The interest rates are scaring me. Home prices are scaring me. I just feel like, this isn't the right time for me. And I get it. There's a lot of pressure on home buyers. It's a scary time right now. Nobody ever wants to buy something at the peak and then see it lose value. And I use the example. They're currently renting a house, right? They're renting a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house, and they're paying $2,500 a month. But the neighborhood they want to move to, rents are about $3,000 a month. And I'm not going to go into the story because it's lengthy, but it's all spelled out in that video that's on the Facebook page and on the YouTube channel. But basically, we looked at an FHA loan, 3.5% down payment at today's interest rate, real interest rates, not, what he was approved for 6 months ago. And he can still buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bath house with a 2-car garage, exactly what he wants. And he's going to be into the deal with a monthly payment of under $2,500 a month. So in that instance, he can go into that neighborhood and rent for $3,000, or he can buy for $2,500. So that's what I mean when I say focus on your budget, not your interest rate, because here's a guy who thought this makes a lot of sense for me at 3.5%. I want to go be a homeowner. I see the long-term value in building equity. This is the neighborhood I want to raise my family in. And also, too, I don't know if I mentioned, they have young kids, so they're going to be in that house for a while because they picked it because of the school district. So they're going to be there for at least the next 10 years if all their plans go as they imagine they will. If it made sense for him at 3.5%, it still makes sense at 4.5%. And that's where I'm going with this conversation with budget, because he saw the headlines that say interest rates soaring, buyers are getting priced out of the market. It's, we're creating a generation of renters. He's reading all those headlines, and for him, he needed to have a conversation to help digest all that into real math and real numbers. So that's where I'm going with that. Focus on budget, not rate, and just keep your plans moving forward. It still makes sense for a lot of people in this market. And if you have questions, give us a shout. The Anytime hotline is 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569. Or visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. That's mr.mortgage. Hey, it's Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. You hear me all the time talking about the need to have the very best team representing you in a real estate transaction. And that starts with a really great agent. If you've got a great agent, that's awesome. But if you don't, check out www.reallyGreatAgents.com. There you'll find the best of the best, regardless of the city they work in or the brokerage they work for. www.reallyGreatAgents.com. www.reallyGreatAgents.com.
Here's another 5-star review.
My wife and I own a small business. And the way our accountant file our taxes, we don't show much income on tax returns. Because of this, it looks as if we don't make the money. This was a problem for our bank when we applied for a mortgage. But not for Mark. He verifies our income by using our monthly bank statements. Mark and his Mr. Mortgage team made a big difference for me. Yes, I am happy to recommend Mr. Mortgage Mark.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at SOFLappraisal.com. That's SOFLappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. SOFLappraisal.com. And tell them you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
That's right. We are back. My name is Mark Eitel. I host the Mr. Mortgage Show every Saturday morning. Same bat time, same bat channel. And thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, shoot us your questions. Call or text with your questions. Dom, my producer, is here. He's on the board. He's got the phone in his hand. This man makes things happen behind the scenes. So he will be happy to get your questions on the air for you. So shoot them to us via text or call 561-291-8569. That's the Anytime hotline, 561-291-8569. Or you can visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. Hit the Contact Us button, and there you can shoot your questions to us also via the web. So we are going to dive into questions. Speaking of questions, I know Dom is giving me the finger, or the signal rather, that we've got one teed up. So, hey, Dom, what do we have?
All right. We have Jay sent in this question. It's a two-part question. Jay is asking, what's the minimum down payment on a fourplex? I want to live in one and rent out the other 3 units. Can I count the additional rent as income?
Hey, Jay, that's a great question. So you answered the question I was going to ask you back with the second part of that. So here's the really cool thing with buying a fourplex if you intend on occupying one of the units. And this applies for a duplex and a triplex also. So anything from 1 to 4 units, we can underwrite, and any lender can underwrite as a primary residence if you're going to truly live in one of the units as your primary, which means for you, awesome news. With an FHA loan, you can buy a fourplex with as little as 3.5% down. And with a conventional loan, there are programs from 3% to 5 and 10% down. So it's a super cool idea in this environment because people are saying, and I don't remember where I heard this story, but it was long ago. As I mentioned in the first segment, I've been in the mortgage and real estate business for a long time. And somebody long ago shared with me, if you can't afford a house in this market, buy two. And I never understood what that meant. And finally, I asked him because he was, pretty adamant about that. And he said, if you can buy a duplex, you can use the rental income to qualify, and you're going to reduce your monthly expenses, and you're going to have 2 units appreciating in this market. So that's the answer to your second question. Yes, you can use the rental income to help you qualify for that purchase. So great idea in this market, because as we talk about all the time, we reference the Zumper report. Rental rates are outpacing in some markets home appreciation and certainly keeping up with it in others. So if you have a chance to buy a 4-unit property and live in one and collect rent on the other 3 doors, that's an amazing way to get started in real estate, because you're going to get the advantage of the primary residence loan programs, right? You're buying your home, as well as the advantage of rental income, and then appreciation across the board. And certainly, the rent value of that unit, should you choose at a later date to move out of it and go buy something else for yourself. That's going to be easy to rent because it's already, the other 3 units are establishing a rental price and a desire. We call it the absorption schedule. There's already a quick absorption rate in that market on rents, assuming, that everything's occupied and rents are still, where they are now and you're collecting rent. It's going to be an easy unit to rent is where I'm going with that. So I think it's a great idea. It's a great strategy, and buying it with the intent to live in it is a wonderful opportunity for you to utilize a primary residence mortgage program. So if you have questions on that, the Anytime hotline is 561-291-8569. What I mean by anytime is truly anytime. If Dom and I are not in the studio doing this show, that phone number pushes to my office. So somebody at the office will grab the line, and if you need me, they'll get you to me, and we can talk about that further. But yeah, 561-291-8569 is the Anytime hotline. But hopefully that answered your question. I think it's a wonderful strategy. I commend you for looking to grab a fourplex in this market. We talked about a score that was in the Jacksonville market last week, where someone had found that 7-unit property. Different loan program for him because it's a 7-unit property, but he's doing the same thing. He's going to live in 1 unit and rent all of the others out and be in a great cash flow position. So hopefully that helped. If you have more questions, just give us a shout on that. But let's throw it back to Dom and see if we have another question teed up.
We do. Denise left us this question on the hotline. Denise said she's relocating from another state. How long do I need to be on the job in Florida before I could qualify for a mortgage?
Hey, Denise, so you and everybody else are relocating to sunny South Florida. Well, I'm assuming South. Anywhere in Florida is sunny by comparison to a lot of the country. But great question. It's a question we get often. And there's a few different answers to that question. So I'm going to start with, and I'll give you some examples because, as I mentioned, we see this a lot. Recently, we've had a client relocate from New York, and they're in an executive level position with their company, and they've accepted a position down in Florida, a comparable position with a comparable corporation, and they don't have to be on the job one day down here. We're using their offer letter. They've gotten an offer letter from the corporation that they're going to work for. They've got great work history with their existing corporation. The Florida employment opportunity is at the same or more, which is the key, income as the New York job was. And we use the offer letter to qualify her. So she moved down, bought the house, and then went to work. So you can do that. Now, there's some caveats to that. If you're switching careers and you have no history in the new career, so let's say you're a nurse and you're going to become an office manager. Unless you're an office manager of a medical facility where your nursing skills are going to help, it's unlikely that that's a like enough position that you're transferring to qualify. And there may be some instances where that would work. If you were a nurse with some managerial responsibilities in a doctor's office, they might translate, but that might not be the best example. But if you were a nurse and you're going to go sell advertising for this radio station, you've got no history as a radio advertising salesperson, and you're going from salary to commission. In that instance, you're going to want to establish yourself in the new employment role and establish a new income base to qualify. So you will have to be here for a period of time. Also, too, I had an interesting scenario where someone is relocating from Ohio and the majority of their income is currently commission. And the client base that they serve is local, meaning he has to be face-to-face with his clients. He can't serve his clients over the phone, which is interesting in this world that we live in because COVID has kind of made us all remote. But nonetheless, his profession still requires him to be in his territory, if you will. So he's relocating to Florida. He's unable to perform his duties remotely. So he's taking a new position with a similar, not the same company, but a similar company. And because he's commissioned only, we need him to establish here in Florida. He's not carrying over his client base. Therefore, he's not carrying over any of the established commissions. So in that instance, there is going to be some time requirements on the job in Florida to establish himself before he's going to qualify. So hopefully that gives you a little more insight. I would be happy to answer that question in greater detail. If you want to give us a shout during the week, 561-291-8569, or visit the website, www.mr.mortgage, or just shoot us a text and say you want us to call you back with more details, because there are some nuances. It's going to have to do with the job you're leaving and the job that you're taking in the new state, or in Florida in this case you mentioned, and then make sure that the salaries are at least the same, if not more, because then we'll be able to use your salary history in the debt to income qualification. So hopefully that helped. There's a few nuances to that question. So if you need more information, I encourage you to give us a shout or visit us online, and we'll be happy to help. But yeah, we see a lot of relocation, and not just to Florida. There's a lot of relocation to Texas, to Arizona. The cool thing is, if you're able to keep your job and work remote, that's a super easy transition. And there's a lot of people doing that. So you don't have to establish in that instance employment in the new state, nor do you have to even have an offer letter, because you're staying with your current employer. In that instance, your HR department will just acknowledge that you're able to maintain your employment at 100% effectiveness and salary, or commissions in that case, if you're able to go remote. So hopefully that helps. There's a lot of people shuffling around the country, relocating to different areas, and the loan programs have accommodated that. So you hear the music. We are headed to a break. Encourage your questions to 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569, or visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. Hey, it's Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. You hear me all the time talking about the need to have the very best team representing you in a real estate transaction. And that starts with a really great agent. If you've got a great agent, that's awesome. But if you don't, check out www.reallyGreatAgents.com. There you'll find the best of the best, regardless of the city they work in or the brokerage they work for. www.reallyGreatAgents.com, www.reallyGreatAgents.com.
Here's another 5-star review.
We started our loan with a different company. They said we were approved, but at the last minute they told us there was a problem. I still don't know what went wrong, but thankfully our real estate agent told us about Mark. I was pretty stressed, but it's the perfect house, so we gave Mark a shot. He got it done. I'm not sure what was different, but I don't really care. We even got a better interest rate and with less money out of pocket than the first guy quoted us. It was a great surprise. Yes, I'm happy to recommend Mark and his Mr. Mortgage team.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at SOFLappraisal.com. That's SOFLappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. SOFLappraisal.com. And tell him you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
All right. We are back. My name is Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show, and we are happy to take your questions and do our best to answer them at 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569. That is the Anytime hotline. You can shoot a text or give us a phone call to that number. As always, visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. Mr.Mortgage. And you heard me talking in the first segment about the video series that we're now going to do on YouTube and the Facebook page. If you want to find that, just go to the www.mr.mortgage page. And if you scroll to the bottom, there's a Facebook link and a YouTube link. Or you can just search the Mr. Mortgage Show in Google, and they will both pop up. So I'm going to try to take some of these topics where people call during the week and they want a deeper dive on them. And if there's enough, which I think there will be if the last few weeks' questions are any indication, if there's enough of a demand and enough questions being asked, then we're going to do one each day and just do kind of a daily briefing at the end of the day, maybe 5 minutes, just a quick hit to kind of follow up on some of these questions that require a little more information. So check that out when you have time. That's on the www.mr.mortgage Facebook page. But the links are on the bottom of the Mr. Mortgage page. So, and let me know, drop your comments in there. I'd be curious to know what everybody thinks, if there's some other topics they want covered. If you want a specific topic covered, the easiest way to do it is to call or text to the 561-291-8569 number. So speaking of that, questions being called or text or emailed in, I'm going to throw it over to Dom, my producer, and see what he has.
All right, we have Sherry emailed this one to us. She's asking, I'm hearing a lot about a recession in the news. What will a recession do to the home values?
Okay, that was Sherry?
Yes, it was.
All right, Sherry. Hey, that's a great question. And honestly, that's what we're hearing the most of lately. People are concerned. They're seeing inflation. They're seeing a creep in interest rates. And now it's pretty clear that we're going to enter a recession. When it happens, whether it's in the next 6 months, if it's in the next 6 weeks, we don't know. We don't know how deep of a recession is that we're going to experience, but it's highly likely that we're going into a recessionary period. So because I'm getting asked this question so often, and I talked about it a little bit last week when I used the Johnny Carson show analogy, right? Because we watch the old rerun TV channels, and Johnny was talking about, 12% inflation, that particular episode. And then I dug into the interest rates and the appreciation rates of those months specific to that show. So this is on everybody's mind. And if you remember when I talked about that, the homes appreciated and we were experiencing high inflation, double digit, and high mortgage rates, also double digit. So because of that, I felt pretty encouraged that, real estate will survive most recessions. And I'm not the only one that feels this way. I dove into the data and I looked at all of the recessions back to the World War II era. And I discount the housing bubble burst of, 2008, 9, and 10, because that actually caused the recession. Housing prices declined. So that's what caused the recession. But a normal recession that's caused by other economic factors, housing seems to do pretty well by comparison. So I printed out just a very brief summary. And I think what I'm going to do is I'll probably do one of those deep dives on the YouTube or Facebook channels about this, because we're getting so many questions related to this. But in the early 70s, we were in a recessionary period from, I believe it was November of 73 to March of 75 is what they're calling that particular recessionary cycle. And during that time, we saw homes appreciate 11.7%. So in a recession, we still saw appreciation. Now, whether that appreciation outpaced inflation or the cost of money, that's all secondary conversation. My point in all of this is only to share that the home value itself went up. And whether we're in a recession or not, we're going to need homes to go home to. You need a place to live. So I guess I found it encouraging in this data that during the recessionary time periods that were outlined in this report, home values did pretty well. There was another recession in the early 80s. Home appreciation was 4.5%. Right after that, we had another recession in 81. That was an energy crisis. The energy crisis recession, we saw home values that managed almost a 2% increase. So where I'm going with this, and the data supports it throughout all of the recessionary periods post-World War II, home values seem to weather the recessionary market better than most assets. So just throwing that out there, I don't know if that's kind of a high-level answer to the question. I still go back to what we talked about many, many times before. If you can afford to buy a home and you're buying your home, your primary residence, I would get less caught up in where we are economically and where we are interest rate wise. Certainly you want to keep your personal financial house in order. You want to make sure you're making your financial decisions based on your job stability, you've got the income, you qualify. But in that example that we talked about in the first segment of today's show, that family could rent for $3,000 a month or buy for $2,500 a month. It makes sense to buy. And in the examples that we just talked about in the recessionary cycles, the home values went up. And the best part about buying now is if you believe the forecast that interest rates are going to continue to rise, by buying now, you've locked in that low interest rate for 30 years. So as rents go up and other inflationary pressures continue to affect your monthly expenses, the principal and interest portion of your housing payment is going to remain the same. That's never going to go up. Yes, taxes and insurance can adjust over time, but the lion's share of your payment is not going to change. So I want everybody to exhale, just exhale. We talked about this before. Interest rates moving from, 2.5% to 3% caught everybody by surprise. 3% to 4 to 4.5. And as we move into the fives, people are they're reacting. They're not responding. So look at your budget. Does it make sense? Can you afford it? Is this somewhere you want to call home? If all of those things line up, then it probably makes sense for you to go ahead and buy something. And on the other side of this, as rates continue to move up a little bit, it's interesting because some people are thinking we're at the peak of the value. There's going to be more sellers on the market. That may not be the case. There may be people who have refinanced in the last 2 years and have a 3% 30-year fixed rate, and they're not moving anywhere. They're happy with where they are. They're sitting tight, and they may even take some of that newfound equity and grab an equity line and put an addition on their home. So just because there's some uptick in interest rates, I wouldn't automatically assume that there's going to be more inventory hit the market because people are assuming we're at that apex, because when somebody sells, they still have to buy. So I share all that not to be pessimistic. I still feel like real estate's the best place to be. It definitely made a significant difference in my early life by buying a house instead of renting it. That's why I'm in the business. And it just cycles. That's all. That's, I guess, where I'm going with this. It cycles, and there's always a good time to buy and always a good time to sell, depending on your personal circumstances. And if you can afford the payment and it's a place you want to live, and that payment is fixed for 30 years, I would highly suggest moving forward before rates continue to move up. And then that's just going to put more pressure on your buy side. So to answer your question, recessions typically don't pull real estate values down. The biggest contrast to that statement is going to be the housing bubble burst of 2008 2008, 9, 10. It depends on where you were in the country when you saw the biggest effects on it. That's why I give that range. But housing prices went down significantly during that time period. However, they led us into the recession, and the reason they went down wasn't because of the recession. It was for a whole variety of factors that I could talk for days on, and I would be happy to talk to you for days on it. If you have questions regarding that, give me a shout. 561-291-8569 is the Anytime hotline, and that number will go to my office during the week. Or visit the website, www.mr.mortgage. That's www.mr.mortgage. And we will be right back after this break with more of your questions. Hang in there. Hey, it's Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. You hear me all the time talking about the need to have the very best team representing you in a real estate transaction. And that starts with a really great agent. If you've got a great agent, that's awesome. But if you don't, check out www.reallygreatagents.com. There you'll find the best of the best, regardless of the city they work in or the brokerage they work for. www.reallygreatagents.com. www.reallygreatagents.com.
Here's another 5-star review.
We kept our business above water with credit cards during the pandemic. I'm glad we did. Business is better than ever. But I didn't want to be a slave to those credit card payments. I called Mark about the rec loan he advertises. Long story short, we did a rec refinance and paid off everything, even the car. Now we only have the mortgage payment. We're saving a bunch every month. Yes, we are happy to recommend Mark and the Mr. Mortgage team.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at soflappraisal.com. That's soflappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. soflappraisal.com. And tell them you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
All right, we are back. And yes, call us now, 561-291-8569 is the Anytime hotline, 561-291-8569. You can also shoot a text to that number, or as always, visit the website, www.mr.mortgage, www.mr.mortgage, never a .com. Just type in mr.mortgage. So in the spirit of questions being answered, I'm going to throw it back to Dom, my producer, and see what he has teed up for us.
All right, we have Manny who just called us with this. Manny's asking, I listened to last week's show a second time on the app. I still don't fully understand the bamboo toilet paper analogy. You were saying prices will go down?
Hey, Manny, I love that you brought that up. So if you're a regular listener of the show, you caught last week's episode where we talked about supply and demand, and I used a crazy analogy with the pandemic, and somehow I weaved it into the bamboo toilet paper that we were stuck buying at my house because that was all we could find. So, and hey, before I lose this thought, Manny, thanks for listening on the app. We are on all the podcast apps, so I'm super excited that you were either entertained enough or confused enough that you had to hit that episode a second time to figure out what I was talking about with the bamboo TP. But thanks again for checking us out on the podcast, and super excited to have this question, because I have to admit, I have had several comments during the week about, WTF, Mark, what about the bamboo toilet paper? Where were you going with that? So here's my point in all this. And this kind of spills back to Sherry's question about the recession. So everybody is so hyper-focused on housing right now. It's the biggest news outside of the pandemic in Russia. Everybody's talking about housing. And there's some really good data out there, and there's some really bad data. There's some people that are trying just to get attention. They're scaring you. It's clickbait. So what I want to share, and I'm going to go back to the bamboo toilet paper analogy just for a minute to answer Manny's question. When there is more supply than demand, prices go down. When there's more demand than supply, prices go up. Now, we talked about last week, we all went through the pandemic together, and there were some key essentials that we couldn't find. Everybody panicked, bought all of the paper products at the grocery store, at the convenience store. You couldn't find napkins, paper towels, toilet paper. We couldn't find hand sanitizer. You couldn't buy bleach. Anything that you used, either paper products or disinfectants, they were nowhere to be found. So what happened? We all went to eBay, we went to Amazon, and we bought whatever we could, wherever we could, and we paid whatever we had to pay to get them. And I will not forget this. There was a gas station convenience store that I stop at on the way home to get gas, and they had single rolls for sale for about, I want to say it was around $5 a roll. Now, they weren't price gouging. They paid a premium to get it. They were doing their clients a service by providing it. But my point in telling that story was the bamboo toilet paper example had to do with what we found at CVS. CVS went out and did all of the consumers a huge favor, and they bought whatever they could buy. And they bought a bunch of this bamboo toilet paper. And it's awesome. It's good for the environment. There's a nice story around it, but it's expensive and it's strange. It's brown. It doesn't look like toilet tissue. But that was all that you could get at that time. So we started to use it. Now, when the Bounty and the Scott's and all of the other brands were back on the shelf, nobody wanted to buy the bamboo toilet paper anymore. There were many other choices. So more supply. That bamboo toilet paper, because it lost all of its demand, went on sale. And I still have a ton of it in my pantry because I'm a cheapskate and I bought it all on sale. And that was my point in that story. When there's more supply than demand, prices, and it doesn't matter if you're buying apples, if you're buying cars, if you're buying houses. If more people want to sell it than want to buy it, prices are going to go down. If more people want to buy it than want to sell it, prices are going to go up. Not until we get to an even demand and sales side of the scale are balanced are we going to see pricing stabilize. And that's where I think we're headed. I think the additional cost of money are going to put some people's purchase on hold because they're unable to buy the house they really want and they're going to wait and try to save more money. That's a whole nother conversation. Very rarely do people outsave appreciation, but I'm not going to go into that now. So once there's the same amount of demand as supply, prices will balance. I think that's where we're going, and that's where I started with this story is as money becomes more expensive, it may ease the demand on the buy side and level that cycle out and pull appreciation, which was just reported this week, year over year, 18%, which amazes me that we're still at, this clip. It's going to pull it back down to where it should be, 6%, 9%, 8%, somewhere in that range. So the bamboo toilet paper story was just the best analogy that popped into my head last week about supply and demand. So I hope that helps when you're looking for this inevitable real estate crash, which I don't think is inevitable. I think there's more demand than there is supply. So prices are supported. Even at 5% interest rates, there's more demand. And there's also demand from institutional buyers who want to buy properties and turn them into rentals. So that's another demand side of the equation that people aren't necessarily taking into effect. And when these Wall Street companies are moving blocks of cash to buy properties, they're less affected by a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So there's a lot of demand in the market to indicate that prices are going to, at very least remain where they are. So Manny, that was where I was going with that story last week. I kind of like to break things down to very simple analogies that I can understand. I'm born and raised Florida boy. I spent my life on the beach and in the mud with my hillbilly buddy. So I have to have a story that I can wrap my mind around, and that's where I was going with that. And also, too, as we're talking about this, there's some people who say if interest rates hit 6%, the bubble's going to burst. I don't agree with that. I think demand will slow, and the reason I say that is as I mentioned before, I started this career in 1999 during the housing frenzy of the early 2000s, which led us into that bubble burst. And this isn't me saying this. I did this research. These are the statistics. Over 40% of the mortgages used to purchase property at the height of the bubble were adjustable rate, high LTVs. Most of them were interest-only ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages, meaning that payment went up at some period of time, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, 36 months, whatever it was, when the fixed period expired, that payment jumped, and sometimes significantly. That person had to sell because they couldn't afford to own that property anymore. Now today, adjustable rate mortgages represent less than 1% of the purchase mortgages in this market. So the people who are buying homes today are either paying cash or they're getting fixed rate mortgages that the payments are not going to adjust. So unless we get a spike in unemployment, I don't see where the pressure on housing getting led into a bubble bursting situation exists. That's just me. As long as unemployment remains low, I do think we need some wage side increase to offset some of this inflationary pressure for sure, because it's harder and harder for people to afford everything, not just a house. And that needs to be considered also when I'm talking all the time about look at your budget, not the interest rate. You need to look at your global budget. What's your grocery bill now? What's your gasoline expense? Because when you're doing a mortgage application, that's not taken into consideration. When we evaluate your debt to income, we're not looking at your grocery bill that went from $100 to $200 over the last, 12, 14 months. You need to consider that. But my point is, unless unemployment starts to spike, most people are still able to go home and pay their bills. So I would watch supply and demand in the market. If there's, housing remains on the market longer before it sells, you see those inventory numbers creep up. And if the unemployment rate starts to increase, then I would be concerned. For now, I think it's just an uncomfortable existence of a higher interest rate that we're living through. But the reality is, I think housing values are supported by a lot of ancillary causes. So anyway, I hear the music. We're going to roll into this break, and on the other side of the break, we'll continue your questions. Hit us up at 561-291-8569 or visit the website www.mr.mortgage. Hey, it's Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show. You hear me all the time talking about the need to have the very best team representing you in a real estate transaction, and that starts with a really great agent. If you've got a great agent, that's awesome. But if you don't, check out www.reallyGreatAgents.com. There you'll find the best of the best, regardless of the city they work in or the brokerage they work for. www.reallyGreatAgents.com, www.reallyGreatAgents.com.
Here's another 5-star review.
As a realtor, I have a bunch of mortgage brokers to choose from, but I prefer to work with Mark and his Mr. Mortgage team. In this crazy market, there is no room for error, especially on the mortgage side. Mark's team moves fast, keeps everybody in the loop, and makes things happen. They always give my clients a great deal and take the time to walk them through every step of the process. When you're considering a lender, I encourage you to talk to Mark Eitel and the Mr. Mortgage team.
It's not every day that you need an appraisal, whether it's for a divorce settlement, estate planning, or maybe you're appealing a tax assessment, or you just want to make sure you have adequate coverage in your property insurance. When you need a certified appraisal, turn to my friends at SOFLappraisal.com. That's SOFLappraisal.com. Peter and his team have been appraising properties here in South Florida for decades. SOFLappraisal.com. And tell them you heard this on the Mr. Mortgage Show.
Are inflation and everyday expenses eating into your retirement income? Maybe you've considered a reverse mortgage and have unanswered questions like, do I still own my property? Can the bank kick me out? What happens when I die? Can I still leave my house to my kids? These are all great questions. Visit www.moreaboutreverse.com to learn more. That's www.moreaboutreverse.com. www.moreaboutreverse.com.
Welcome back to the Mr. Mortgage Show. Call us now, 561-291-8569.
All right. We are back. My name is Mark Eitel, host of the Mr. Mortgage Show, and we certainly encourage your questions to 561-291-8569. You can call or text those anytime. As I always mention, that pushes to the office during the week. So 561-291-8569 is the anytime hotline, or visit us online at www.mr.mortgage. That's mr.mortgage, never a .com, just type in mr.mortgage. So we are going to keep this train rolling with some questions. Let me see what we have. What do we have, Dom?
All right, we have Jones, who just sent us this text. Jones is asking, do I need to have my contractor to finalize remodel project costs before I can apply for refinance?
Hey, Jones, that's a great question. And it kind of alludes to where we are in the market, with a lot of people who have a ton of newfound equity, and they love their neighborhood and they're not going to move, but they're going to remodel their house. So here's the answer to that question. There's two variables that you have to take into consideration. My gut answer to your question is no, because most people consider a renovation, you're redoing the kitchen, you're doing the bathrooms, painting, maybe putting on a screen enclosure, that type of stuff. So in that instance, you don't need your contractor or your budget. You just need to make sure you have enough equity to cover your project, your deal, if you will. So there's a term called tappable equity. And all that means is that's the amount of money you can pull out of your property in the form of a cash out refinance. So this is not an unrealistic example that I'm going to give you, because I'm talking with somebody right now that's doing this. They paid $300,000 for their house about 6 years ago, I want to say. I have to look at the actual details. I want to say around 6 years. It appraised to $1 million now. So they have about $700,000 in equity that they can pull out. Now, let's use that $1 million mark. We need to go 80% loan to value. So now that's $800,000. Take that first position out of 300. So they have $500,000 in tappable equity. Assuming $500,000 will meet all your project needs, that's all you need to do. Cash out refi to 80%, or most likely not even to that point. But in that instance, you don't need a contractor. You don't need your budget. You're just doing a cash out refi, pulling out enough cash to cover your project. And actually, it would be better to do it now than wait for interest rates to continue to rise if this is truly your circumstance. The other situation we see a lot of is where people will do a complete renovation. They're adding on to the house. They're significantly changing it. And we see this a lot in the waterfront communities. I've got a friend, Jeff, who bought on the Finger Canal down in Boca, and he's got about $3 million in tappable equity. He's got the only single-story, two-bedroom Florida-style house on his street. Everybody's built the McMansions, and he wants to go up second-story, whole 9 yards. With him, we're going to do a construction to perm loan, because he's actually almost rebuilding the house. So that would be a different scenario. You're going to need your contractor. You're going to need your budget, because you're doing a bona fide construction to perm loan at that point. So hopefully that answers your question. This brings up another whole category as we move forward of people who, they're going to kind of nest. They're going to stay where they are. We saw this in the last recession that we went through, and make their home the best they can make it. And, you do a cash out refi and pay off all your debt, renovate your house, and then just kind of hunker down and get through the next, economic cycle if you believe it's doom and gloom. So we've got a few refinance options in that category. One is called an R2R, which is refinance to renovate. And that's kind of like the scenario I mentioned with Jeff in Boca. It's going to be a full-blown renovation. The other is the rec loan, which we're going to reduce, eliminate, and consolidate some debt. You can also pull cash out of a rec loan. A lot of people are unaware of that. They think it's just meant to consolidate, but you can pay everything off and pull some cash out. And there are definitely some pricing advantages to the rec loan. And then lastly is an old-fashioned cash-out refi, which may make sense for you too. So hopefully that answered your question. Now's a great time to pull some of that equity if you need it, because rates are still ridiculously low. So, hey, you hear the sirens rolling up behind me. That means that this segment has come to a close. If you have questions, I encourage you to send them to 561-291-8569. That's 561-291-8569. That's the Anytime Hotline. Or visit us online at www.mr.mortgage. That's mr.mortgage.
That's a wrap. Join Mark Eitel next week for more thrilling, edge of your seat discussions about real estate and mortgages right here on the Mr. Mortgage Show.